Hey guys, welcome back to another impressions video, this time for a long overdue title in my backlog, and that game is The Last Story. As you can see, I got the first print run of the game that came with this beautiful box set with an art book and a soundtrack CD. And I started playing this game on day one after I got it, and I got pretty far. I'd say I completed about 60 to 70% of the game, and then after that I got sidetracked, and it wasn't until recently that I picked the game back up and decided to finish. And that's the problem that I have usually with RPGs, that I get sidetracked really easily, despite me enjoying the actual game, because I enjoyed The Last Story. This is a very good RPG that it's not quite on the same level as Xenoblade Chronicles. Xenoblade Chronicles, a lot of the RPG enthusiasts, they have it and they consider it as one of the best RPGs out there. The Last Story is not quite up there, and I know a lot of people like to draw comparisons, even though the two games are very different from each other in terms of the gameplay and combat system. But nevertheless, this is a very, very good RPG. It has a bunch of flaws, but again, I think this is a very good title that came out unfortunately very late in the Nintendo's Wii life cycle, but it was better late than never. So I'm really glad we got this game localized, thanks to XSeed. But anyways, let's talk about the game. The story-wise, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the story in this game actually was one of the the main draws for me, because the story is very simple, very easy to understand, if you will. It's basically a love story between Zale, the main protagonist of the game. Zale it's part of a band of mercenaries, and Lady Callista, which is this noble royalty princess, if you will. And so the game introduces this conflict between in their relationship, because she is royalty, he is just a plain old mercenary. So and on top of that love relationship, the game also introduces this hate and war situation between the humans and this race called the Gurak, which is the conflict between humans and the Gurak have been ongoing for centuries. And there's also some pretty cool developments regarding that war between humans and the Gurak throughout the game. So, but for the most part, it's a pretty simple story. So in a way, it fits the game, because this is a short JRPG, if you will. It can take you anywhere from 20 to 30 hours to finish this game, depending on whether you want to complete all the side quests and whatnot. So one thing to keep in mind that I do want to point out before I start talking about all the other features of the game is that this game is divided into chapters, and there are some hidden chapters, or not hidden chapters, but rather missable chapters. So try to look up online, if you haven't played this game yet, try to look up a list of the missable chapters and what you have to do to not miss them, because some of them are actually really cool, and some of them are not really related to the story. They feel more like side quests, but some of them are really cool. And in fact, my favorite chapter in the game happened to be a missable chapter that it's not even story related. So make sure you check that out if you haven't played the game yet. But anyways, I'm just gonna, I guess, start talking about the graphics. For the most part, this game has pretty good graphics, but there are some flaws that that are pretty obvious and apparent, mostly regarding the character models, and the environment themselves. Most of them have really low resolution textures, which is, I guess, somewhat expected, because this is a Wii game. But a game like Xenoblade Chronicles pushed the Wii to its limits, and this game doesn't do that. So some of the models, especially when you watch the real-time cutscenes in the game. You're gonna see some muddy and blurry textures if the camera has a character up close, which is unfortunate, but it's the nature of the Wii console itself. It's not very powerful, but for the most part, again, the game is pretty fun to look at. And I know a lot of people complain about how this game has like a brownish gray filter to it. A lot of people were hoping that the game was a little bit more colorful, but I take that brownish filter and brownish colors as a positive actually, because they give the game this like old storybook type of look and presentation, and for me that was a plus, and it was definitely a factor for immersion into the game and into the story. So that's just me though, so it's really up to you regarding that type of filter, I guess, that they use for the game. So personally I enjoyed that. And then the art direction of the game is really good. The towns, the clothing that the characters wear, they're all really pretty cool looking, pretty well designed. So for the most part, the game looks good, but there are some flaws, especially in the performance, and that's probably the worst part of the game in my opinion. There were tons and tons of unbearable frame rate problems, and I'm not usually the guy that complains about this. I'm not the typical 60 frame per second demanding type of gamer. As long as my games run fairly well, I'm okay with it. If they're 30 frames per second, I'm good, I'm cool with it. But this game, there are points that it looks like a PowerPoint slide presentation. The frame rate drops so incredibly low that it's almost like playing like a slow motion type of video game, and it's unfortunate. So the game doesn't have an optimal performance, unfortunately. So that to me is the lowest point of the last story. Regarding the soundtrack, amazing work by Nobu Uematsu. My favorite title or song from the game is the main theme. So the game has a really great title screen playing that main theme on the background, and it really gives it prepares you for your epic journey and adventure in this game. Now regarding the gameplay, the combat system is very unique in this game, and I really like the combat system, although I do have to say that there are some flaws in it. Basically, the combat system is a mixture of strategy elements, and by strategy I mean that before the start of each battle you get an overview of the battlefield, and you can see the locations of where the enemy is, so you can get a good feeling of where the enemy healers are, where their magic enemies are, the melee type of enemies. So you get a good grasp, and based on that overview scene you can plan accordingly in how to approach the battle. So once the battle starts, the game takes this hack and slash approach. If you choose to do so, you can just run up to the enemies, push the A button and attack them manually, or you can take cover behind structures and do like a slash attack that deals a great amount of damage to the enemies. Or you can also opt for long range attacks, since you have a bow in this game, and you can use the environment to your advantage. So you can use the bow to destroy, say, columns or pillars, and set structures can fall on top of enemies, killing them. So really cool use of the environment. And lastly, the game has this I don't know what should I call it, I guess some kind of like turn-based menu that when you push up on the control on the D-pad you get this menu where you can dictate commands to your party members, and if if they're magic casters, you can, you know, tell them to cast a, you know, a fire attack, or, you know, if you have a healer, you can you know, dictate for the healer to put a healing circle. So a really cool feature that it becomes fundamental in the game. That coupled with your special powers that you have earlier on in the game. Your character Zale gets this mysterious power given to him, which allows you to use this feature called Gathering, in which every time you use Gathering, you draw the enemy's attention, which is bad news for you, but good news for the rest of your team, since it gives them enough time to cast, you know, their own spells and you know, do their own attacks. So there are pros and cons. You know, you're gonna have the enemies chasing you, but at the same time, it gives your team more time to prepare accordingly for battle. So a really nice, you know, balance system where you have to weigh the pros and the cons. And you also have some other advanced techniques such as Gale that I'm not really gonna go into detail, but overall the battle system offers a lot of variation and it's very unique. I've never played a game like this before, but I do have to say that the game, the battle system is somehow flawed, because you're not really forced to use all the features in it until later on in the game. So basically what I did at first was I was just using the hack and slash approach for all the early chapters in the game. I was just approaching the enemies, hitting the A button, killing them, and, you know, off you go to the next battle. But that only gets you so far, and when you reach the later chapter, especially the boss battles, you have to use a pretty varied type of combat system. You have to use all the features in the combat system, otherwise you're not gonna beat certain bosses. So you really have to think really carefully how to use the different features in the combat. And you know, so I hit that wall later on in the game where you know, my hack and slash approach wasn't working that well anymore, and I sort of forgot how to use all the different features that the game offers you. So I had to go back and watch some of the tutorials in the help section of the game. But once I did that, I was able to fully appreciate how the combat system works, and that's when the game really clicked with me. And you know, so my advice to you guys is try not to use the hack and slash approach, even though it's very tempting, because you just want to get through the game and experience the story. But try to, as soon as you learn a new ability or a new tutorial comes up, make sure you make use of whatever the game recommends you. That way you're gonna fully embrace the system and enjoy the game at its fullest. Now, I was talking about your party members, and those are key in this game, because at one time I believe you can have up to 4 or 5 different party members. So there's a lot of action going on in the game, and all for the most part, all the party members are, you know, your friends, which are, you know, part of your mercenary group, if you will. And it's really cool because the game already starts with you being friends. So the game saves a lot of explanation, I guess, or, you know, typically in RPGs, you know, you start by yourself, and as you progress through the game, you recruit new people to your party. But in the last story, you already have all your friends in your party. So I guess in a way that saved time and made this a short JRPG, if you will. This is essentially, as I mentioned before, a 20 to 25 hour game. So that cuts down a lot of time, if you will, and it's really cool because the game really gives you that feeling that this is a true group of friends. You know, each member, each character in the game has their own personality, and each, you know, they have certain bonds between each other, you know, and the game does a really good job of portraying that friendship throughout the game. And it's just really fun to, you know, to watch and listen to some of the cutscenes and the bonds between the characters in this game. With that being said, though, I think it would have been nice if the game offered, how should I explain this? Offered perhaps a little bit more detail about each character. I'll know a little bit more about the past of each character. I know certain chapters in the game focus on some of the stories behind some of your party members, but it would have been nice to see a little bit more development in that area. But nevertheless, I think this game could have benefited from maybe 3 to 5 more hours of gameplay time, just to develop that bond between your characters a little bit more, perhaps explain their story with a little bit more detail. I think it would have been nice, because by the time you actually get to know all the characters really well, by the time you learn to appreciate the bond and the friendship that was formed, that's when the game ends. So it's almost like you're left with wanting a little bit more in that regard. So nevertheless, the game, it's really good, it's really fun. Again, it's not on the same level as Xenoblade Chronicles, and the game, because the game is short, I think it doesn't suffer from pacing issues whatsoever. Although a lot of people did complain that the game, it's a little bit limited in its world, because essentially there are I guess limited amount of environments you visit through the game. This is not like an open world type of RPG like Xenoblade Chronicles, where you have this humongous world to explore. This is actually the opposite. You have Laszlo's Island, which is where the game pretty much takes place in its entirety, and that's basically where 60 to 70% of the game happens. And Laszlo's Island, it's a fairly big place to explore, but in a way, I can see why people felt that it was a little bit limited in that regard. Now, the typical RPGs, things like side quests, they're entirely optional. I would probably say don't even bother doing them. A lot of the rewards are not really, nothing necessary to complete the game, and for the most part, it's really frustrating, because once you accept a side quest, you don't have any way to check your progress, I believe. So it becomes a little bit tedious and frustrating to do that. The game also offers a online multiplayer portion that I have not tried, but I've heard the netcode is pretty bad, so I didn't even bother trying that. I was happy enough with the single player campaign, and it was a pretty good experience in my opinion. And I really like the fact that it was a 20 to 25 hour game, considering I have a huge backlog. I don't mind playing RPGs that are of that length. So I think the game did a very, very good job of combining a somewhat complex combat system, and just going over the simple love story between Zale and Callista, and that coupled with a pretty good pacing between the chapters. I think the game did a really good job. So in terms of design, I think this is a pretty solid RPG, definitely worthy to take a look if you own a Nintendo Wii. And especially, this game is going to become rare at one point or another, so just to avoid another Xenoblade type of situation, I'd say get the game now. You can still get it for under $30, I think, nowadays. So the last story, a very solid JRPG. I'm really glad XSeed decided to publish this game, and I'm glad it paid off for them, because this is the highest selling game in XSeed's story, I believe. It sold really, really well, and I'm glad that in a way we were able to retribute them that trust in them to bring the game over to North America. So anyways, that's it. I hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. The last story, really good RPG to close out the Wii's life cycle. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you all later.